Imagine waking up in a stone cave, but not as a frightened, primitive creature. Rather, as a thinker, a scientist without a lab, a mathematician with no paper, a philosopher guided by stars. Now ask yourself that from fire to farming, from wheel to Wi-Fi, the arc of progress has been steady, even inevitable. What if we didn't evolve from ignorance to knowledge but fell from it? For centuries, we've told ourselves a reassuring story, that humanity rose, slowly but surely, out of the muck of ignorance and superstition. We think of our ancestors as crude, primitive, barely surviving. But what if that's the real myth? What if intelligence is not a linear staircase, but a fragile flame, one that has sparked, flared, and gone dark, over and over again? What if we were smarter? Before we go further, pause and think about this. Or 10,000 were barely human. Could humanity have once held knowledge we've since forgotten? If that idea intrigues you, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear might not just change how you see the past. It might make you question the present. The modern world runs on a myth of superiority. We have smartphones, satellites, supercomputers, and so we assume those who lived 5,000 years ago, no electricity, no cars, no Wi-Fi, must have been cavemen. But knowledge isn't always obvious, and intelligence doesn't always look like a glowing screen. Let's step back and look at something we often ignore. What intelligence actually means. Problem solving, memory, symbolism, navigation, astronomy, storytelling, engineering, communication, ethics, things our ancestors practiced every day in ways we still don't fully understand. It's not just about tools or tech, it's about pattern recognition, painting symbols in dark caves so deep and so perfectly placed. Some acoustics researchers believe they were designed for sound. They didn't leave behind wires and blueprints. They left behind stories, structures, stars. Consider this. We've only had industrial electricity for about 150 years. That's a blip in our species' existence. But humans like you and me, Homo sapiens, have existed for over 300,000 years. What were we doing with all that time? Sitting in caves, poking sticks in the dirt, rather than asking, how did they plan it, calculate it, align it? No, we were adapting, observing, recording the skies, mapping migrations, hunting in teams, burying our dead. That's not random, that's not primitive, that's intentional. The idea that we went from dumb to smart is more than just incorrect. It's dangerous, because it blinds us to clues left behind. When we dismiss ancient humans as less than, we stop looking at their work with respect. We stop asking the right questions. We see 10-ton stones moved across continents and say they must have dragged it somehow. We see pyramids lining up with stars and say coincidence. Instead of asking, did they understand celestial geometry better than we think? Outsourced intuition to algorithms. Outsourced wisdom to Google. In raw size, the average human brain today is smaller than it was in the Ice Age. We look at ancient oral traditions, myths, encoded calendars, and call them fairy tales. Instead of compressed memory systems passed down for survival, they had to memorize seasons, track stars, sometimes shining brightly in temples or towers, understand animal behavior, encode knowledge in rhythm and song. Their survival depended on it. What if our ancestors were not only smarter than we believe, but maybe, in some ways, smarter than us? Scientists today admit that Neanderthals who lived alongside early Homo sapiens had larger brains. That doesn't make them better, but it makes things more complicated. And when we study ancient skulls, we find that modern human brain volume has been shrinking over the past 10,000 years. That's right. Now, size isn't everything, but still, what if the price of modern convenience has been cognitive decay? We've outsourced memory to machines. Ancient humans didn't have that luxury, and they did it without books, without screens, without apps. So, here's a theory. Intelligence is not a straight line. It's a cycle, a flame passed from generation to generation, sometimes protected, sometimes lost, and sometimes flickering in silence under the stars, waiting to be found again. What if we aren't the most advanced we've ever been? What if we're just one version of human brilliance, and others have risen and fallen before us? What if intelligence isn't about what we build, but what we remember?
Let's take a detour into myth, but not the kind of myths filled with dragons and fairy dust. We're talking about something far stranger, ancient stories that sound like science. It's easy to dismiss myths as just bedtime stories of a forgotten past. But what if they're not? What if myths are the only surviving record of something older, deeper, and dangerously close to forbidden truth? What if our ancestors weren't spinning fables to explain thunder, but encrypting truths too fragile to write down truths about astronomy, biology, time, and the very structure of the cosmos? From West Africa to South America, from the Arctic Circle to the high Himalaya, let's take a journey across continents. You'll see that ancient cultures, separated by oceans and millennia, often describe the same things: a great flood, cycles of destruction and rebirth, gods descending from the skies, and beings who once possessed great knowledge, now lost. Coincidence or collective memory? Let's begin in Mali, West Africa. First confirmed by modern Western astronomy in 1860 to one fully understood with telescopic precision only in the 20th century. The Dogon people have long been considered just another tribal group with colorful traditions. But in the 1930s, French anthropologists uncovered something that stunned the academic world. The Dogon had a sacred belief that the brightest star in the night sky, Sirius, had an invisible companion star. They called it Po Tolo, describing it as a tiny, incredibly heavy star that orbited Sirius in 50 years. Here's the twist. That star does exist. It's called Sirius B, a white dwarf. So how did the Dogon know? No written math, no access to Western science. They tracked Venus with such accuracy that their predictions outpaced some 19th century European astronomers. They had no time preserving knowledge from a civilization that existed before ours. And yet they described Sirius B, its density, and its orbit with remarkable accuracy, centuries before science caught up. Some say they were visited by outsiders, perhaps Egyptians or others suggest something far more unsettling, that they were remembering something older. Let's zoom out. The Mayans created a mathematical calendar so precise that modern computers still study it. In India, the Vedas describe the speed of light, the age of the universe in billions of years, and concepts like atomism long before such ideas appeared in physics textbooks. In Egypt, myths speak of a time when gods ruled earth and taught mankind the arts of geometry, agriculture, medicine, and the stars. Even the Bible describes a moment when humans lived longer, were mightier, and walked with God. Now ask yourself, are these just symbolica, or are they garbled memories of a lost age? Here's something modern education doesn't teach. Before books came memory palaces. Ancient cultures knew how to store complex knowledge in song, rhythm, myth, and geometry. Australian Aboriginals used songlines, navigational systems sung across the land that could guide someone thousands of miles. The Iliad and the Odyssey, both oral for centuries, hold detailed knowledge of battle formations, sailing routes, and astronomy embedded within poetic verses. And then there are the nursery rhymes, folk songs, and fables that actually contain warnings, calendars, and medical practices. Maybe the ancients weren't telling bedtime stories. Maybe they were encrypting data. So who were the teachers? Most cultures have them figures who arrived suddenly and taught humanity something profound. In Mesoamerica, it was Quetzalcoatl, a bearded god who brought math, astronomy, and architecture. In Egypt, it was Thoth, keeper of secrets, inventor of writing. In Greece, it was Prometheus, who gave humans fire and knowledge only to be punished by the gods. Even in Sumer, the world's first civilization, gods like Enki emerged from the sea, gave humanity tools, language, and law. All these cultures agree on one thing: knowledge didn't evolve slowly. It was given, then lost, then remembered. Again and again, there's a strange paradox in all this. The deeper we look into ancient stories, the more scientific they become. But the more we analyze them with modern methods, the more we realize we don't know what we're looking at. Are we seeing coincidence, or the remnants of a knowledge system too advanced to survive the flood of time? We ask questions, But maybe we're asking from the wrong side of the story. What if these cultures weren't primitive, but survivors, not building from nothing, but rebuilding from ruin?
Let's say you wanted to build something that would last 10,000 years. Something so massive, so perfect, so mysterious, that even in the distant future, people would still be asking, how did they do this? You'd need tools, massive ones. Cranes, lasers, 3D software, engineering degrees, and maybe an entire civilization backing you. Now imagine trying to do it with no iron tools, no wheels, and no machines, just bone chisels, copper hammers, and raw manpower. Sounds impossible. That's exactly what ancient people supposedly did. And yet, these structures exist. They tower above us. They're aligned to stars. They challenge everything we know about engineering. And no one, not even our smartest minds, can fully explain them. Welcome to the impossible architecture of the ancient world. Deep in the Bolivian highlands, 12,000 feet above sea level, sits a site that makes engineers shake their heads. Puma Punku. Not as famous as the Egyptian pyramids, but maybe even more baffling. Why? Because the stones here aren't just big, they're cut with laser-like precision. Perfect 90-degree angles, interlocking joints, drill holes, all carved into one of the hardest stones on Earth. Here's the kicker. To shape diorite today, you'd need diamond-tipped tools. But mainstream archaeology tells us this was built over 1,500 years ago with no advanced tools. So how and why do the blocks lie scattered, as if blasted apart by some ancient cataclysm? It's almost like someone built something incredible, then something wiped it out. Sound familiar? Let's talk pyramids. No ancient structure is more iconic or more controversial. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned perfectly to true north, with an error of just 3/60th of a degree. It's made of over 2 million blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, stacked over 480 feet tall. And here's the puzzle: no hieroglyphs inside, no mummies, no evidence it was ever meant to be a tomb. Its base is level within less than an inch. Its dimensions encode the number pi, and even the speed of light. Coincidence? Maybe. But here's the part that gets weirder. There's no evidence of how they built it, no blueprints, no artist signatures, no cranes, just stories. And those stories often mention beings from the stars. Again, myth or misunderstood memory. In Lebanon sits Baalbek, home to the largest known building stones ever used by humans. One stone weighs over 1,000 tons. That's more than 3 Boeing 747s. Even with today's technology, we'd struggle to move it. Yet somehow, ancient builders not only moved it, they placed it on top of other stones perfectly aligned. No wheel marks, no crane remnants, no inscriptions. Just massive stone blocks, sitting like silent puzzles no one can solve. So who were these builders? Were they giants of mythology, or just humans? With knowledge we no longer possess, one detail keeps showing up in these ancient sites: astronomical precision. Stonehenge aligns to the solstices. The pyramids line up with Orion's belt. Angkor Wat in Cambodia mirrors the Draco constellation. Teotihuacan's layout is based on the Pleiades. How did primitive cultures understand celestial mechanics this deeply? Some say it was spiritual. Others believe they were watching the stars for survival, farming, navigation, seasons. But maybe it was something more. A message, a memory, a map. After all, if your world had once been destroyed and you wanted your knowledge to survive, you wouldn't write it on paper. You'd write it in stone. Some researchers suggest these sites were created using lost technologies, not alien necessarily, but human, just forgotten. Vibration tools, sonic levitation, anti-gravity principles, things that might sound like science fiction, but are being explored today in fringe labs. If we rediscovered these methods now, would we even recognize them as ancient? Or would we assume we invented them ourselves? What if our ancestors didn't lose their way? We just lost their instructions. We think of history as a straight line, from the caves to the pyramids, to iPhones and space stations. But what if that's not how time works, and then collapse again and again? What if civilizations rise, reach their peak? What if we're not the first? Not the first to build, not the first to fly, not even the first to dream of the stars. This chapter explores the idea that history isn't linear, it's a loop, and we might just be living in the latest version of a story that's played out many times before. Have you ever wondered why so much of ancient history is missing? Entire civilizations vanished with almost no trace. The Indus Valley, Göbekli Tepe's builders, we find pieces, ruins, myths, but the full picture, gone. Because every time a great civilization falls, whether from war, disease, or natural disaster, it leaves behind silence. And over time, we forget. Think about it. If the modern world lost power for just 50 years, how much would survive? Digital data erased, paper records decayed, our buildings crumbled. Only stone would remain. And to future archaeologists, we might seem primitive too. Across nearly every ancient culture, one story keeps surfacing literally. A great flood, the Epic of Gilgamesh, Noah's Ark, Manu Deucalion, Utnapishtim, thousands of miles apart. Different languages, different gods. Same story, a world-ending flood that wiped out everything. Coincidence or shared memory? Modern science now supports the idea that at the end of the last ice age, around 11,600 years ago, sea levels rose over 400 feet due to melting glaciers. Coastal cities where people would naturally settle would have been swallowed by water. So, what did we lose beneath the oceans? Could there be cities buried under the sea that predate anything we found on land? And here's where things get really interesting. There are underwater sites, ancient, mysterious, and unexplained. Dwarka, India, submerged ruins found off the coast, possibly 9,000 years old. Yanaguni, Japan, a strange, staircase-like monument underwater, natural or man-made. Cuban underwater structures. In 2001, sonar scans revealed a grid of stones off Cuba's coast at depths, suggesting they were over 10,000 years old. Mainstream archaeologists hesitate. They say natural formations. But others argue we're just afraid to rewrite history. Because if these sites are real, they predate everything we've accepted. And that means history books aren't wrong. They're just missing an entire chapter. We like to think we're the most advanced civilization ever. But look closer. The ancient Greeks knew the earth was round and measured its circumference with shocking accuracy. The Antikythera mechanism found in a shipwreck was a mechanical computer built 2,000 years ago. Roman concrete is more durable than modern concrete, and we're just now rediscovering how it worked. So, how many other discoveries were lost? How much knowledge died with forgotten civilizations? Maybe it's not that ancient people were primitive. Maybe we're just picking up where they left off. A pattern begins to emerge. Civilizations discover knowledge, build wonders, reach a peak, collapse through war, disease, or natural disaster, and then fade, and the next wave begins again. But here's the terrifying part. What if we're approaching the end of our cycle? Climate change, nuclear weapons, technological dependence, fragile global systems. The signs are there. We think we're invincible, but so did they. Close your eyes. Now imagine a world with no screens, no books, no clocks, only the stars, the earth, and your mind. In this world, knowledge doesn't come from reading. It comes from visions, dreams, journeys, not across land or sea, but inside your own consciousness. What if ancient people weren't just primitive survivors, but explorers of the mind? In this chapter, we'll dive into the forgotten relationship between ancient humans and altered states of consciousness. In the modern world, psychedelics are controversial, but in the ancient world, they were sacred gateways to the divine, portals to knowledge beyond the physical realm. The soma of the Vedic text described as a drink of the gods, said to grant immortality. The Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece where initiates drank a potion believed to produce visions of life after death. Ayahuasca used by shamans in the Amazon for thousands of years. The Maya and Aztec use of psilocybin mushrooms in spiritual rituals, known as flesh of the gods. These weren't party drugs, they were keys. Keys that unlocked other dimensions of experience. Now, pause. What if these rituals weren't just spiritual? What if they were scientific? Recent neuroscience shows that psychedelics reduce activity in the brain's default mode, network the part responsible for ego and identity. In simpler words, they temporarily shut off the part of your brain that says, "This is me, that is not me." And once that's gone, many users report feeling connected to everything. The earth, other people, the cosmos. Could ancient humans have discovered these effects thousands of years before modern science? And more importantly, what were they seeing? Let's talk about something strange. People from all over the world, different times, different tribes report seeing the same things during deep trance states. Serpents or snakes, sacred geometrical patterns, beings of light, a sensation of leaving the body and entering another realm. A feeling of universal oneness or deep cosmic truth. Now ask yourself, if this is all hallucination, why are the visions so similar? What if, just like there are physical laws of the universe, there are also inner landscapes and changing and ancient, and these ancient people, they were the first cartographers of the soul. Let's go even deeper. Could these altered states have influenced human development itself? Some researchers like Terence McKenna proposed the stoned ape theory, the idea that early humans may have eaten psychedelic mushrooms growing in the wild, and this led to a rapid evolution of language, creativity, and whether true or not, think about this. Many early cave paintings, like those in Lascaux, France, feature spirals, animals with human features, and cosmic symbols. And often, they're in deep, dark caves far from natural light. Were these the temples of altered minds? Ancient people believed they were talking to gods. Today, we'd say they were hallucinating. But what's the real difference? If your brain creates a vision that gives you answers, wisdom, or peace, does it matter where it came from? What if God is just a word for the deeper part of ourselves? The parts modern life has buried. Ancient rituals weren't about escaping reality, they were about piercing it, going beyond the surface, into truth. Here's a haunting thought. In today's world, you need therapy to feel safe. You need medication to sleep. You need noise to avoid silence. But ancient humans, they meditated by the fire. They listened to dreams. They danced until their minds opened. What we now call weird, they called holy. They weren't afraid of altered states. They lived in them, celebrated them, learned from them. Thousands of years ago, long before science, satellites, or space agencies. People looked up at the night sky, and somehow they understood it. They knew when the seasons would change. They knew when to plant, when to hunt, when to prepare for storms. They even knew the movements of planets and stars with mathematical precision. No telescopes, no clocks, no Google. So, how did they do it? To us, the night sky is a mystery. But to ancient humans, it was a calendar, a compass, a classroom, and maybe even a temple. Every night, they watched the stars shift. Every year, they noticed patterns repeat. And over centuries, they built systems of celestial knowledge that still leave scientists in awe. Take the Babylonians. They tracked the positions of planets and predicted eclipses more than 2,500 years ago. Or the Maya. They could calculate the length of a solar year to within 17 seconds of modern accuracy. Let that sink in. 17 seconds. Let's explore one of the most famous ancient observatories on Earth. Stonehenge. At first glance, it's just a circle of giant stones. But those stones are more than art. They're aligned with the sun. On the summer solstice, the sun rises perfectly above the heel stone, casting a shadow into the center of the circle. It's not random, it's design. Now go across the globe to Nabta in southern Egypt, thousands of years before the pyramids. Nomadic people built a circle of stones, aligned to the summer solstice sunrise. No telescopes, just observation, and a deep relationship with the sky. Ancient architecture wasn't just functional, it was celestial. Look at the Great Pyramids of Giza. Many researchers believe that layout reflects the stars of Orion's belt. The shafts inside the pyramids point directly to specific stars that were considered sacred. Or the Temple of Karnak in Egypt. It's aligned with the sunrise at winter solstice. In Mexico, the Temple of Kukulkan creates a serpent-shaped shadow down the pyramid. Steps on equinox days, as if a celestial snake is slithering from the heavens. Coincidence? Not likely. These were calculated constructions, built to honor, harness, and understand the cosmos. But how did they know all this? How did they measure star movements, track solstices, predict lunar eclipses? Without a single screen, it starts with one thing: observation. Ancient astronomers watched the skies every single night. They passed their findings orally, through chants, carvings, and legends. Over generations, this became cosmic wisdom. Their tools: wooden poles, stone markers, sightlines through mountains, shadow-casting instruments, simple but powerful. They didn't separate the stars from their lives. The sky was a living calendar, a sacred teacher, a divine clock. Now here's where things get strange. Many ancient myths at first glance seem like fantasy, but what if they were encoded science? For example, the Greek myth of Orion, the hunter matches, the movement of the Orion constellation through the sky. The tale of Phaethon, who loses control of the sun chariot, may represent a solar flare or meteor impact. Indigenous Australian Dreamtime stories speak of stars dancing across the sky, what we now know as the Milky Way's rotation. Myths weren't just entertainment. They were memory devices, coded stories, meant to preserve sky knowledge across time. Ancient humans didn't just look at the stars, they believed the stars looked back. They saw reflections of life, fate, and spirit in the sky's motion. In many cultures, the human body was mapped to constellations. The heavens weren't distant, they were within. This cosmic worldview shaped everything. Architecture, religion, agriculture, philosophy, timekeeping. To them, the sky wasn't separate from Earth. It was Earth's guide. Modern astronomers are still trying to understand how ancient people achieved such precision. New studies using LiDAR have revealed forgotten observatories hidden in jungles. Stone circles, once thought to be random, are now being mapped to celestial alignments. And just maybe, we've underestimated ancient minds. We think of them as primitive, but they were pattern masters, cosmic listeners, celestial builders. Maybe they weren't less intelligent, they were just looking in a different direction. You die, your heart stops, your body grows cold. But then what? For ancient civilizations, death wasn't the end. It was a doorway, a crossing, a journey. Sometimes terrifying, sometimes beautiful, but always divine. So what did the ancients believe waited for them on the other side? Let's step beyond the veil, into the forgotten worlds of afterlife belief systems that still haunt us today. To ancient people, life was only one part of existence. The real story began after death. This wasn't guesswork or superstition. They built entire societies, monuments, and philosophies around what comes next. In fact, some cultures spent more energy preparing for death than living. Why? Because they believed the afterlife was forever. Let's begin with perhaps the most famous afterlife vision. Ancient Egypt. To the Egyptians, death was not a tragedy. It was the passage to eternal life, if, and only if, you passed the test. Here's how it worked. First, your soul journeyed through the Duat, the underworld, a place filled with monsters, fire lakes, and gates guarded by serpents. At the end, your heart was weighed against the feather of Matha, symbol of truth. If your heart was heavy with sin, it was eaten by a demon called Amit. If your heart was pure, you joined the gods in the field of reeds, a perfect mirror of life on earth. The pyramids, the mummification, the tomb paintings, they weren't for the living. They were maps and manuals for the dead. In the ancient Greek worldview, everyone went to the underworld. But not everyone went to the same part of it. Their afterlife had layers. The asphodel meadows for ordinary souls, Elysium for heroes, and the virtuous Tartarus for the wicked, a place of punishment. Worse than death. To reach any of these, your soul had to cross the river Styx. And you needed to pay the boatman Charon with a coin placed on your tongue at burial. Forget to pay, you'd wander the shores as a ghost forever. Now, travel east to the land of Hinduism and Buddhism, where death isn't the end or even the beginning. It's part of a cycle called samsara, birth, death, rebirth. Your actions in this life, your karma determine your next existence. Live with compassion and selflessness. You rise higher, perhaps, even toward moksha, spiritual liberation. Live in greed, hatred, or ignorance. You return lower. This belief changed how people lived, because every act wasn't just for today. It shaped your eternity. To the Norse, the afterlife was a battlefield. Literally. If you died with a sword in your hand, with honor in your heart, you might be chosen by Valkyries to go to Valhalla, Hall of Eternal Glory. There, warriors feasted, fought, and trained for Ragnarok, the final cosmic battle. But if you died a coward or unremarkable death, you might go to hell, a cold and dreary underworld ruled by a goddess of the same name. For the Norse, death wasn't about peace. It was about how you died. Among indigenous cultures, afterlife beliefs varied deeply, but often shared one sacred truth. The soul returns to the earth. Some tribes believed in a spirit world just beyond the veil of the forest. Others saw the afterlife as becoming one with ancestors or being reborn as an animal, tree, or river. Death was not feared. It was a return, a reunion, a circle, not a full stop. across all these cultures, one thing remains the same: death-inspired ritual. In Egypt, bodies were embalmed with sacred oils, wrapped and placed in golden In China, emperors were buried with armies of terracotta soldiers for protection. In Europe, coins, food, weapons, and even pets were buried alongside the dead for use in the next life. These weren't just customs, they were cosmic passport stools for navigating the unseen world. So why did all ancient people, across all continents, create such rich afterlife systems? Maybe because death was the one thing they couldn't control, couldn't stop, couldn't explain. So they imagined, they built stories, and in those stories, they found hope. Today, we still ask the same question: what happens next? And maybe, just maybe, the ancients knew something we don't. A 2,000-year-old analog computer found in a shipwreck. Massive stones weighing hundreds of tons lifted without cranes. Ancient batteries. Advanced surgery. Precision that defies bronze tools. How did ancient civilizations accomplish the impossible without modern technology? Or did they have knowledge we've lost? What if the science of our ancestors was far more advanced than we dare to imagine? This is the mystery of forbidden ancient technology. In 1901, off the coast of Greece, divers found a corroded mass of bronze gears inside a Roman shipwreck. At first, it seemed like junk until someone realized this wasn't junk, it was a machine. Today, we call it the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient device from around 100 BCE, used to predict solar eclipses, planetary movements, and lunar phases with astonishing accuracy. It's been called the world's first analog computer. But here's the twist. Nothing even close to it appears in historical records for another 1,000 years. So the question remains, who built it? And why did this level of technology disappear? In the highlands of Bolivia lies a site called Pumapunku, part of the ancient city of What makes Pumapunku mysterious isn't just its age estimated at 1,500 years old, but the stones, massive granite blocks, weighing up to 130 tons, cut with near laser precision, perfect 90-degree angles, interlocking joints, drill holes. Some cuts are so clean, engineers today struggle to recreate them without modern tools. And yet, the people of the Andes supposedly had no metal tools, no wheels, and no cranes. So how did they do it? In 1938, in modern-day Iraq, archaeologist Wilhelm Koenig found something strange. It looked like a clay jar, but inside was a copper cylinder with an iron rod. When filled with vinegar or wine, it generated an electric charge. Could it be that the ancient Mesopotamians had a form of electricity 2,000 years before the modern world? Medical experiments? Rituals? We don't know what they used it for, but the fact remains it worked. And it's not alone. Similar artifacts have been discovered across the ancient world, suggesting these weren't accidents. Take a closer look at ancient skulls from Peru. You'll find clear signs of trepanation, removal of parts of the skull, likely for surgery. And here's the shocking part. Over 70% of patients survived, with no antibiotics, no modern anesthesia. Yet somehow, these ancient surgeons knew how to operate without killing. In India, texts like the Sushruta Samhita describe complex procedures: cataract removal, caesarean sections, even plastic surgery over 2,000 years ago. Were they using knowledge we've forgotten? Of course, some theories go even further. They suggest extraterrestrial involvement, that perhaps advanced beings shared knowledge with early humans. This idea, made famous by shows like Ancient Aliens, proposes that massive structures like the pyramids, Stonehenge, or the Nazca Lines were built not with primitive tools, but with help from the stars. It's controversial, it's speculative, but it raises a real question. Were ancient people truly limited by the tools we think they had? Or have we underestimated human innovation? Many ancient monuments are aligned with shocking precision to celestial events. The Great Pyramid aligns almost perfectly with true north. Stonehenge marks the summer solstice. The Maya tracked Venus's movements to the day without telescopes. In India, the Jantar Mantar observatories used massive stone instruments to track time and stars with extreme accuracy. Without satellites, without space probes, they looked up and understood the universe. So what happened? If ancient people had such sophisticated knowledge, why don't we still have it? Some say war and conquest destroyed libraries like the legendary Library of Alexandria, which may have held the wisdom of thousands of years. Others believe these ancient technologies were guarded secrets passed only to the elite or priesthood and vanished with them. And then there's time itself. The longer something is buried, the harder it becomes to rediscover. The clues are still here, in ruins, in artifacts, in legends whispered across millennia. Maybe it's not about aliens, or time machines, or secret devices. Maybe the most forbidden part of this science is our reluctance to believe it existed. Because if the ancients could build computers, batteries, surgical tools, and monuments that defy explanation, then maybe we've been telling the story of human history backwards. Maybe they were not behind us. Maybe they were ahead of us, in ways we're only starting to rediscover. Long before microscopes or medicine, before psychology or philosophy, humans turned to something else. Ritual, magic, the unseen forces of the universe. In the temples of Egypt, on mountaintops in Tibet, around sacred fires in Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica, people believed that the world was shaped not only by matter, but by spirit. They weren't merely praying. They were performing science of the soul. What if rituals weren't just symbolic? What if they were technology's spiritual tools to align mind, body, and nature? In ancient cultures, everything was a ritual. The rising of the sun, the planting of seeds, the birth of a child. Even war and death. From chanting and dance to smoke and sacrifice. Rituals were believed to open gateways between the physical and spiritual worlds. And sometimes, strange things happened. In Samaria, the land of the first city's massive stepped temples called ziggurats weren't just places of worship, they were astronomical observatories and spiritual launch pads. Priests would ascend the steps and conduct rituals under the stars, believing they were communicating with gods, or perhaps something else. They burned incense, made of rare resins. They chanted in complex mathematical rhythms. Modern researchers are beginning to understand. These weren't random acts. They were systems designed to induce altered states of consciousness. In other words, ancient neuroscience. In ancient India, mystics spoke of a coiled serpent sleeping at the base of the spine. This wasn't a creature, it was energy. When awakened through breath, meditation, and mantra, the serpent would rise, opening the chakras, spiritual energy centers within the body. This wasn't metaphor. It was a precise system mapped and practiced for thousands of years. Today, we see echoes of it in yoga, mindfulness, and breath work, but the ancients may have understood bioenergy on a level we're only beginning to rediscover. Alchemy was never just about turning lead into gold. In Persia, Egypt, and later in Europe, alchemists believed the material world mirrored the spiritual one. Transforming metal was a symbol, the real goal, the transformation of the self. They spoke of the philosopher's stone, a substance that could purify not just matter, but the soul itself. hidden in cryptic texts and symbols. Alchemical knowledge was passed in secret because it was powerful and dangerous. And some say, still alive, the Egyptians didn't separate magic from healing. They blended both. Spells were inscribed on temple walls, amulets were placed on the sick, priests used herbs and incantations. The Ebers Papyrus, a 3,500-year-old medical text, includes treatments for everything from toothaches to spirit possession. In their view, illness could be physical, spiritual, or magical, and all had to be treated. It wasn't superstition. It was a holistic science, one we're beginning to return to today. Ancient people believed that the moon could influence human behavior. They weren't entirely wrong. Modern studies show that lunar cycles may affect sleep, mood, and behavior, but the ancients went further. In some cultures, full moons were times of sacred ceremonial moments to open the third eye, purge emotions, or access visions, what we call hallucinations. They called messages. What we see as madness, they saw as revelation, and through ritual, they believed they could safely travel those inner realms. Of course, skeptics argue it's all myth, that magic was just a way to explain what they didn't understand. But consider this. They tracked the stars better than we did until the 1800s. They built temples aligned with solstices and eclipses. They mapped the body's energy flow without X-rays or What if their magic wasn't superstition, but a language of energy and consciousness? What if we've only changed the names? Think rituals are outdated. Look around. Birthday candles, a wish sent into flame, wedding rings, a circle, symbol of eternity, national anthems, communal chants before battlefields or games. These aren't just habits. They're modern rituals, echoes of ancient tools to focus intention, shape emotion, and anchor identity. The science of the soul never truly vanished. It just evolved. Hidden beneath the sands, buried under vines, carved into forgotten cliffs, lie the final pieces of humanity's greatest puzzle. The temples, the sacred places, the echoes of where gods once walked among men. This is not just the end of our journey. It is the beginning of something deeper. Because when we speak of temples, we are not only speaking of stone, we are speaking of memory, of power, of truth etched in eternity. Across continents, from Angkor Wat to Abu Simbel, from Teotihuacan to Göbekli Tepe, we find monuments no modern civilization could replicate. But they didn't just build them for shelter. They built them to touch the divine. These weren't just structures. They were spiritual machines, aligned with the stars, charged with ritual, built with mathematics, magnetism, and mystery. Some believe these temples weren't built by the civilizations we credit, but by those that came before history was written. How did ancient builders move 800-ton stones without cranes? Why do sites thousands of miles apart share identical symbols? Why do myths from Egypt, India, Sumeria, and Mesoamerica all speak of sacred geometry and a golden age that fell into darkness? What were they preserving? And why were they trying to hide it in plain sight? The truth may be too vast for history books, but not for the stone. The temples still whisper it. 1. Pumapunku, Bolivia's stones cut with precision we still can't duplicate. Interlocking like Lego pieces, laser-leveled smoothness, built at 12,000 feet above sea level. Kadua Baalbek, Lebanon, home to the stone of the pregnant woman, weighing over 1,000 tons and moved uphill. No modern machine can lift it. 3. Angkor Wat, Cambodia, over 500 acres. Perfect celestial alignment, a city of stone built in isolation yet mapped like the stars above. 4. Göbekli Tepe, Turkey built 11,000 years ago, before the invention of the wheel. And then, deliberately, who built these places? And what were they trying to protect? Some ancient legends tell us these temples were not homes of worship, but gates, seals, anchors, holding something in or keeping something out. They aligned with constellations, yes, but also with energy lines across the earth, what we now call ley lines. What were they channeling? What power did they contain? And what happened when they were forgotten? In ancient texts from Egypt to India, we find a shocking parallel. They describe the human body itself as a temple, the spine as a pillar, the brain as the inner sanctum, the heart as the altar. Did the ancients understand that the greatest temple was within? Were the outer temples just reflections of the inner world, a cosmic mirror guiding us back to something we forgot? Maybe the final secret is this: we are the missing piece. Over 10 chapters, we have journeyed through lost cities, forgotten gods, ancient knowledge systems, sacred geometry, frequency and vibration, alchemy, and the transformation of the soul temples that challenge everything we thought we knew. And now we stand here at the edge of what's known, peering into the ancient void. The ancients may be gone, but their wisdom still here, encoded in the stars, etched in the stones, and buried in the silence between heartbeat and breath. Maybe the gods never left. Maybe we were the gods, and we simply forgot. Every temple, every myth, every ritual wasn't about worshipping something outside of us. It was about remembering who we truly are. This is where the journey ends, but the quest begins. Go explore. Go question. Go unlock what's hidden inside the temples and inside yourself. Because the greatest ancient secret of all is that you are the key. Thank you for joining us on this journey through lost worlds, forgotten truths, and hidden knowledge. Subscribe, share, and stay tuned. The secrets may be ancient, but their time is now.